Junhyun sat quietly, lost in a flashback. He found himself thinking that, now that he reflected on it, every interaction he had ever experienced with the opposite gender had always been through a screen. But he told himself that this would end today. He was at a party, asking his friend about Eunbyul Sunbae's whereabouts. His friend replied that she had gone outside to get some fresh air. Determined, Junhyun stood up, thinking that this was the day he would finally confess his feelings to her. As he made his way outside, he noticed many people around, but his thoughts were entirely focused on Eunbyul Sunbae. He reminded himself that they had told him she had gone this way. Some people nearby pointed him toward a room where she was said to be. When he peeked inside, he was surprised to see Eunbyul Sunbae there, but not alone. She was engaged in a playful wrestling match with another boy. The sight left Junhyun completely stunned and speechless. He stood there quietly, listening to their conversation, realizing that they were only talking about their workout session. Watching them, he thought bitterly that everything he was seeing had once been part of his dream to touch watermelons. Returning to the present, he often found himself walking through the university grounds. Now, whenever he passed by, every girl seemed to have a crush on him, whispering to one another that Junhyun liked them. As he walked through the campus, the gentle scent of spring filled the air, accompanied by a beauty that nothing else could replace. His full name was Park Junhyun, and at 24 years old, he had just returned from serving on the front lines of the military. Now, he was heading into the front lines of youth. Walking through the university, he thought that it had actually been a good thing to enlist in the military right after being dumped at the MT event. Still, he couldn't help but feel lonely. Whether he was on his way to school, sitting in the lecture hall, eating, or spending time in his small studio room, he was always alone. One day, while sitting in that same studio room, he found himself watching a workout session on his screen and feeling embarrassed about his solitude. Looking at the screen, he thought ironically that he was with girls here. As he focused on the woman in the video, he noted that the actress's name was Hakagi Haruemi and that she was 38 years old. With a faint smirk, he thought to himself that at that age, she was already an Ajuma. After a moment, he closed the screen and decided to sleep, murmuring that the night felt unusually cold. The next day, he went to university to attend class. The professor stood before the students, commending them for their hard work. As the lecture ended, the students chatted cheerfully, making plans for lunch or talking about heading to the canteen. Junhyun, however, remained seated quietly, thinking to himself how lonely he was and how he would have to eat alone again. Nearby, two girls were watching him. One of them encouraged her friend to go talk to him, reminding her that she had mentioned how handsome he looked. The girl who was considering approaching him was named Nayeon. She shyly admitted to her friend that Junhyun was simply the best among all the guys at the university. Meanwhile, Junhyun sat there thinking that perhaps he should just go eat in the cafeteria. His thoughts were interrupted when Nayeon's friend nudged her again, telling her she should hurry and talk to him before someone else did. Gathering her courage, Nayeon closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and approached Junhyun's desk. In a soft, hesitant voice, she said that if he didn't mind, they could go and have lunch together. Before Nayeon could even open her eyes, her friend spoke in a disappointed tone, saying that Junhyun had already left. She explained that he had walked away as soon as Nayeon began to speak. Hearing this, Nayeon froze in shock, her expression filled with disbelief. She could hardly believe that he had disappeared so quickly. Meanwhile, Junhyun was walking alone through the quiet university corridors, lost in his own thoughts. As he walked, he thought to himself that, in the end, he was once again going to eat alone today. A small sigh escaped his lips as he reflected on how often this happened. He realized how much he needed some friends to share meals and conversations with. While walking, something unusual caught his eye, a wallet lying on the floor near the wall. He stopped and leaned down to pick it up. Holding it in his hands, he noticed that it was quite thick and surprisingly large. He muttered quietly to himself that this was a pretty heavy wallet and seemed like it contained a lot. He turned it over in his hand, wondering who could have dropped it. Just then, a woman appeared a few meters away, looking around anxiously. She seemed to be searching for something. Her voice sounded worried as she said to herself that she couldn't find her wallet anywhere and was certain she had dropped it somewhere around that area. As she moved hurriedly through the corridor, she accidentally bumped into Junhyun. The sudden collision made both of them stop for a moment. The woman immediately turned around, apologizing quickly and saying that she hadn't seen him there because she was searching for her lost wallet. She looked slightly flustered but polite, and then asked if he was hurt. Junyeon shook his head and said that he was fine. Then he extended his hand, holding the wallet out toward her, and asked if it happened to be hers. While speaking, he noticed how large her melons were, a feature that caught his attention immediately. For a moment, he wondered about the department she belonged to because she didn't quite look like a student. There was a certain maturity that showed she might be a professor. When the woman saw the wallet, her face instantly brightened with relief. She exclaimed happily that it was indeed her wallet. She thanked him repeatedly and said she would make sure to compensate him for his kindness. Junyeon quickly waved his hand and replied that it wasn't necessary. He said that anyone would have done the same thing. He then added that he had a class to attend and was about to leave when she mentioned that she also had a class starting soon. He smiled lightly and told her to take better care of her wallet next time. The woman thanked him again, smiling with genuine gratitude before heading off in the same direction. A short while later, when Junyeon entered his classroom, he was caught completely off guard to see the same woman walking in behind him. He blinked in surprise, realizing that she was actually following him into the same lecture room. The thing that surprised him even more was that she took the empty seat right beside him. He sat there for a moment, slightly frozen, thinking in disbelief that the woman whose wallet he had just found was now sitting next to him in class. Curious and still surprised, he turned toward her and asked if she was really attending this class too. She looked at him with equal surprise and said that she hadn't expected to see him there either. She admitted that it was quite a coincidence. Junyeon nodded with a faint smile and agreed that it truly was unexpected. After a moment of silence, the woman turned slightly toward him and introduced herself with a gentle tone, saying that her name was An Nayeon. Junhyun felt a mix of confusion and amazement. Until now, he had thought she might be a professor, but now he realized she was actually a student, just like him. He smiled politely and told her that it was a pleasure to meet her. Then, hesitating for a second, he apologized before asking a question. He told her that he didn't mean to sound rude, but that he was simply curious because she looked quite young. He asked if she didn't mind. He is curious to know about her age. Nayeon looked surprised at first by the question, blinking a few times before answering. After a brief pause, she replied that she was 29 years old. At that moment, Junhyun suddenly became aware that, to his surprise, he had instinctively grabbed her hand. Nayeon looked down at his hand and calmly asked him to let go. Realizing his actions, he quickly released her hand and apologized repeatedly, feeling embarrassed. He laughed awkwardly and said that since she was older than him, she was technically his Nuna. Then he introduced himself properly, telling her that his name was Junyeon. In his thoughts, Junyeon couldn't help but feel astonished. She was 29. That made her 5 years older than him. He thought about how unbelievable it was that he had found the wallet of such a beautiful woman. Feeling quietly proud of himself, he thought that his past self would have been proud of him too for handling the situation so well. Smiling warmly, he said to her that they should get along well from now on. She responded with a kind smile, saying that she would like that. Junhyun looked at Nayeon with a gentle smile and said that he would be in her care from now on. Hearing this, Nayeon smiled back warmly and replied that it should actually be her saying those words instead. As they sat beside each other, Junyeon felt a sense of excitement building inside him. He thought to himself that his campus life was about to change completely. It was going to become something far more interesting than before. Nayeon, sitting beside him, glanced at him with a slightly surprised expression, as if she were also wondering about him. Junyeon was quietly thinking to himself that his college life had never been like this before. As he sat in the classroom, the professor entered and addressed all the students, introducing herself as the one in charge of their course, titled Introduction to Social Welfare. While the professor began the lecture, Junyeon found his attention divided. He noticed the soft, pleasant fragrance drifting through the air, a scent that seemed to reach him again and again. He also felt the subtle, envious gazes of other male students directed toward him. Inwardly, he thought that if he were to turn his head just a little, he could clearly feel the overwhelming presence beside him, the quiet sense of superiority that came simply from having such a beautiful woman sitting next to him. He smiled faintly to himself, realizing how much the world had changed him. He told himself that this time he must not fail. Gradually, he needed to make use of this small but valuable opportunity to build a better relationship with her. However, Nayeon seemed a little awkward, unsure of how to respond to him. Trying to ease the tension, Junhyun told her that it was really okay, hoping to make her feel more comfortable. Later, the two of them were wandering together across the campus. Junhyun, trying to continue the friendly atmosphere, said that she shouldn't refuse and that she should let him treat her to something as thanks. Smiling a little, he added that if she insisted, even just treating him to chicken would be fine. Something like a simple gift voucher would do. Nayeon laughed softly and said that any gift like that would taste good. Junyeon replied that the flavor didn't really matter. It didn't have to be chicken. She could give him anything she liked, and he would appreciate it just the same. After thinking for a moment, Nayeon looked at him and said playfully that in that case, they should go have some pork belly and soju right now. Her unexpected suggestion took Junhyun by surprise for a moment. She noticed his reaction and asked if he didn't like to drink. Junhyun quickly shook his head and said that it wasn't like that at all. Inwardly, he was thinking that the idea of the two of them eating and drinking together alone actually sounded nice. He added with a small laugh that he tended to eat a lot and asked if she would be fine with that. He reminded himself not to think of it too strangely. After all, she was just treating him to a meal. Nayeon smiled and told him not to worry about the money. She said lightly that a student should just relax and let this old lady do the treatment. Her words made Junhyun freeze for a second. He was caught off guard by the way she referred to herself and quickly tried to recover, saying that he hadn't meant anything by it and had just chosen his words poorly. Wanting to move past the awkwardness, she then suggested that they go ahead and eat. He agreed with a cheerful nod. Soon, both of them arrived at a busy restaurant where people were enjoying delicious food. Their order came, filling the table with aroma and color. Looking at the dishes, Junyeon said that the food looked amazing and offered to do the grilling himself. Nayeon chuckled and replied that if he did that, it would take away the whole purpose of treating him. Her words made him feel a bit awkward again, and he thought to himself that it was still hard to believe he was sitting alone in a restaurant with a woman, especially one so beautiful and mature. He couldn't help but notice how large her balloons were. As they started eating, Nayeon commented that the food was really delicious. Junyeon smiled and offered to pour her a cup of soju. She nodded and said that would be nice, asking if it was all right for her to have one. As he poured the drink for her, Junyeon found himself enjoying the moment, the relaxed atmosphere, her gentle tone, and the easy conversation between them. In his mind, he wondered if she already had a boyfriend. Then he thought that if she did, she probably wouldn't have asked him to come eat and drink with her like this. A few moments later, Nayeon picked up the bottle and said that it was her turn to pour him a drink as well. Watching her, Junhyun thought that in that case, they would probably end drinking a little more, and perhaps the mood would grow even more pleasant between them. As his thoughts drifted further, he began to imagine an entirely different scene, one where the two of them, after finishing their drinks, ended up together at a motel later that night, sharing a workout session. The image played vividly in his mind. But then, coming back to reality, he blinked and realized that he had only been daydreaming. Junyeon suddenly reminded himself that he shouldn't get ahead of his own thoughts. He told himself silently that he had learned that lesson the hard way before. The last time he had allowed his feelings to move too quickly, it had only ended in heartbreak. As these thoughts circled in his mind, he realized he was starting to overthink the situation once again. While he was lost in thought, Nayeon called his name softly, bringing him back to the present. He turned toward her and asked about it. After a brief pause, she said that, although it might sound strange for her to ask something like this, she wanted to know if he had a girlfriend. Her sudden question caught him completely off guard. He hadn't expected the conversation to turn in that direction, and for a moment, he was too surprised to answer. Still, he couldn't help but think that the unexpected atmosphere between them wasn't bad at all. In fact, it felt strangely pleasant. Trying to play it off casually, he laughed lightly and said that, unfortunately, he didn't have a girlfriend at the moment. His relaxed tone made Nayeon smile, and she said, with mild surprise, that she had actually thought he might already have one. Feeling a little more confident, Junyeon then asked her in return if she had a boyfriend. At that, Nayeon fell silent for a moment. She hesitated briefly before replying that, as for her, she didn't have a boyfriend either. Then she laughed softly, as if trying to brush off the slight awkwardness of the moment. Junyeon felt a rush of satisfaction inside him, as though he had just won something without realizing it. He thought to himself that this must be a sign, a green light. Just then, two women approached from behind and called out Nayeon's name loudly. Nayeon turned around to see who it was. The two women walked up to her with curious expressions. One of them asked where she had gone off to, almost as if interrogating her, while the other added in a teasing tone that this was quite unexpected. From their expressions and tone, it was clear that both women were slightly taunting her. After a moment, both of them shifted their attention toward Junyeon. Their eyes examined him curiously as they asked who the young man sitting with Nayeon was. Junyeon, unsure how to respond and unable to identify them, sat still and watched them carefully, feeling slightly nervous. As he looked at them, a quiet thought crossed his mind. Both of these women were completely his type. The two women, noticing his physique, began to comment on it openly. They praised his build, saying that his muscles looked impressive, and jokingly adding that he looked like a gangster. Feeling the need to respond properly, Junhyun introduced himself politely, saying that his name was Park Junhyun. One of the women smiled and asked him about his age. He replied that he was 24 years old. At his answer, both women exchanged glances and laughed softly, saying that he was still so young, practically a child. Then, turning to Nayeon, they began to scold her with clear intent. They exclaimed that she was out drinking with such a young man and asked if she had no conscience. One of them remarked that he looked to be about the same age as her nephew. Hearing this, Junhyun frowned slightly and said that this didn't make any sense. He pointed out that he was only 5 years younger than Nayeon, not nearly young enough to be compared to her nephew. One of the women looked at Nayeon knowingly and asked if she wanted to tell the truth about herself to him. The other woman joined in, saying that Nayeon couldn't lie to him any longer. Then, one of the women stepped forward and introduced herself. She said that her name was Jeon Mikyung, that she was 39 years old, and that she was a divorcee. Junhyun was taken aback, completely surprised by her open introduction. The other woman followed with her own introduction, saying that her name was Kang Soyoung, that she was 37 years old, and that she had a son who was in elementary school. Hearing this, Junhyun's eyes widened even more. Finally, both women turned toward Nayeon and, almost in unison, revealed that she was actually 38 years old and, like them, an opsimath, someone who had returned to study later in life. At that moment, Nayeon's face turned completely red with embarrassment. She looked down, unable to meet Junhyun's eyes, humiliated that her lie had been exposed so suddenly. Junhyun sat there, equally shocked, struggling to process the truth he had just heard. After returning home that evening, Junhyun fell asleep and ended up having a vivid dream about doing cardio training with Nayeon. The dream felt so real that when he woke up the next morning, his heart was still racing. As he sat up on his bed, he sighed and thought to himself that, just as he had suspected, being with a 27-year-old woman was simply impossible. Later that morning, he went to the university. As he walked through the familiar campus halls, he found himself thinking that his once lonely and quiet campus life had started to change. He thought that perhaps his life was finally beginning to bloom, and maybe it had even grown into something more than he had ever imagined. When he arrived at class, Nayeon entered soon after him. She greeted him warmly with her usual cheerful morning greetings, and he returned the greeting politely. Not long after, her two friends, Mikyung and Soyoung, also appeared and joined them. The two older women immediately leaned in close, acting playfully clingy toward him. They asked if he would like to go out for a drink with them, saying that for him, everything would be free. Soon, the four of them went together to a nearby restaurant. The atmosphere was casual and friendly, though Junhyun could feel that all eyes around the table often turned toward him. While they were waiting for their food, Nayeon turned to Mikyung and asked whether she had shared her makeup products with Soyoung. Mikyung laughed and shook her head, saying that it wasn't the makeup she had been talking about earlier. She explained that it was actually magnolia berries, and that they were even better than ginseng for women's health. Nayeon looked surprised when she heard that and said that she should have bought some for herself. Mikyung replied with a lighthearted smile that she could have sent some to her instead. As the three women talked among themselves, Junhyun sat quietly, watching them from across the table. A small grin formed on his face as he thought to himself that women seemed to be gathering all around him. It almost felt like he was living in the middle of a real-life harem. While eating, he couldn't help but think about each of them individually. There was An Nayeon, 37 years old, still single, and at that very moment she was kindly urging him to eat more food. Then there was Jeon Mikyung, 39 years old and divorced, who was insisting that she would be the one to pay for everyone's meal. And finally, there was Kang Soyoung, 37 years old, married, and a mother of one son who was now in middle school. As the lively conversation continued, Nayeon smiled and said that she should order another dish. Surrounded by laughter and warmth, Junhyun sat in the middle of the three women, quietly observing them. He thought to himself that each one of them was truly amazing in her own way. Yet, at the same time, another thought slipped into his mind that they're all ajumas. Meanwhile, another day in the same restaurant, he sat alone, clearly looking disappointed. He thought bitterly that this wasn't how he had imagined the start of the semester. It had only been a few days since classes began, yet many of his classmates already had girlfriends. To make things worse, the one person he thought would be in the same lonely boat as him had also found someone, and that someone happened to be the vice president. He had thought that guy was cute and easy to relate to, but now even he seemed taken. The student sat there, staring down at his meal, feeling utterly defeated. He thought to himself that he never could have imagined being beaten in love by an otaku, and yet that was exactly the situation that had happened. As he sat there sulking, he suddenly heard a familiar voice behind him. It was Nayeon. She walked up to him and asked gently if he was drinking again after all that had happened. He asked her the reason for her presence there, wondering why she had appeared at that place so unexpectedly. She replied calmly that her apartment was nearby and that this area was close to where she lived. She explained that she had just been on her way to buy something for her hangover cure when she saw him there. After a short pause, she looked at him and asked if she could join him for a drink. He nodded in agreement and told her that she could. Soon after that, both of them started drinking together. While sipping from her glass, she smiled and told him that he seemed like a cool and nice person. She added that someone like him would surely find a new girlfriend very soon. Her voice carried a tone of reassurance, as if she wanted to comfort him. He looked down for a moment and then replied that he was sorry, but her words did not console him at all. He expressed that he had once thought he would be able to date someone after joining college, but now he felt completely useless. He said that he didn't even have a single female friend around his own age. Hearing that, she was surprised. Meanwhile, he was lost in thought, realizing that even though he had complained about this same problem to Ajuma before, nothing had changed. The situation remained the same, no matter how much he spoke about it. As he continued sitting beside her, he admitted that he had once imagined being able to date and have the kind of workout sessions that other young people enjoyed. Nayeon listened carefully and then told him that he could have easily done both of those things if he really wanted to. He turned to her, asking who he could do that with. He questioned her suggestion as if he genuinely saw no one suitable. He said maybe there would be someone around him, but then quickly reminded her that he had no female friends at all. His voice rose in frustration as he shouted that the only people surrounding him were Ajumas, and there was not a single female friend his age with whom he could share a proper workout session. He then looked directly at her, his expression filled with a mix of curiosity and sadness, and asked whether she could ever kiss a man who was more than 10 years older than her. He seemed to be asking this not just out of curiosity, but also as an expression of his inner insecurity. Looking disappointed, he added that there was no one who would ever see him as a man. To his surprise, she looked straight into his eyes and said that she saw him as a man. Her words caught him completely off guard. She became slightly awkward after realizing the weight of her words, but still went on to confess that she wanted to have some kind of meaning with him. Her confession left him stunned and speechless for a few moments. Seeing his reaction, she quickly tried to clarify herself, saying that she was not suggesting that they do anything right away. She explained that she only meant that she truly saw him as a man, not just as some younger person. After a small pause, she admitted that she had lied about her age earlier and reminded him that if she hadn't done that, she probably wouldn't have dared to say or do such a thing. He continued staring at her, and as he gazed deeply into her eyes, he swallowed hard, feeling nervous yet drawn to her. Then, almost without realizing it, he leaned forward and began kissing her. Later that night, both of them ended up in a motel together. They began their wrestling battle together. He could hardly believe that he was with an Ajuma who was 37 years old. In his thoughts, he tried to convince himself that it was fine, that it was okay to lose his battle pass card in that way. He reflected that no matter how he looked at it, it would have been a loss for him to never experience cardio training during his 20s. At least now, he understood that a kiss truly felt like being close to a woman in her 30s who was beautiful and mature. Thinking that, he reassured himself quietly that it should be okay for him. On the other side that night, Jeon Mi-kyung was having a call with her friend Kang So-young. During their conversation, Mi-kyung asked if So-young had noticed the way Junhyun kept sneaking glances at her balloons earlier that day. She said it felt almost like they were still young again, and half-jokingly added that maybe she should try throwing herself at him since she had been feeling quite lonely lately. While she was still talking, Mi-kyung's daughter suddenly came from behind and told her to wear some proper clothes instead of walking around so casually. Mi-kyung, however, completely ignored her daughter's words, pretending not to hear and continuing her conversation as if nothing had happened. On the other end of the call, So-young laughed softly and told her that her jokes never failed to make her happy. She said that Junhyun was young enough to be their nephew and that he wasn't even much older than her own child, implying that Mi-kyung was getting carried away. Mi-kyung, however, dismissed her friend's words lightly, saying that it didn't matter how young he was. The thing that mattered to her was that he was still a fresh and good-looking man, someone with a certain charm that reminded her of the youthful energy they once admired. Hearing that, Soyoung teased her friend, saying it sounded as though she were talking about sashimi rather than a person, since she kept using the word fresh to describe him. Mikyung took another sip of her drink and sighed, saying that Soyoung should really think about it. She complained that their children always treated them like housemaids, ordering them around without a second thought. Just then, Soyoung's son came into the kitchen demanding food, and she replied that she would make it right away, trying to handle him while still listening to Mikyung. Even after that, Soyoung stayed on the call, half distracted by her chores, while Mikyung continued to vent. She said that the only people they had left to even look at were even their overweight husbands, who constantly demanded meals and expected them to handle all the household work. She said bitterly that after everything, all they were left with were hand eczema and the wrinkles marking their faces. Soyoung, slightly defensive, told her that she didn't have any wrinkles yet, but Mikyung just laughed softly and told her that wasn't the point. She reminded her that they had spent most of their lives serving their families and had earned at least a little self-care and attention for themselves. She told her that it was something worth thinking about, that maybe they should stop neglecting themselves. After a short pause, Mikyung's tone turned slightly mischievous as she continued. She said that when it came to barely legal men who were completely devoted to their workout routines and surrounded by amateur women just as obsessed with exercise routines, there was really only one thing for them to end up doing together. That, a cardio session. At that, Soyoung interrupted sharply, telling her that her jokes were going too far and that it was rude to speak about Junhyun like that. But Mikyung only chuckled and replied that she wasn't joking at all. She told Soyoung that she could only say that because she had never been with a younger man before. She explained that younger men had great energy and potential when it came to workout sessions, and that men of that age didn't really care whether a woman was a housewife or not. According to her, if a woman simply allowed them to train her in those sessions, they would easily fall for her. Soyoung, now a bit uncertain, asked if Mikyung was actually serious about everything she was saying. Mikyung laughed again, her tone lightening, and said that she was only joking. She mentioned that her kid was asking for food, so she needed to hang up. After saying that, she ended the call. When the call ended, Soyoung stood silently in the kitchen for a while, still holding her phone. As she absent-mindedly continued with her household chores, her thoughts drifted back to the conversation she had just had with Mikyung. She replayed the words in her mind, wondering if there might actually be some truth behind the teasing remarks. A quiet thought formed in her mind. Perhaps it really could be that easy to catch his attention. And with that, she couldn't help but think that maybe Mikyung's words weren't such a bad idea after all. After completing the wrestling battle with Junhyun, Nayeon went straight into the kitchen to prepare some food. After finishing the meal, she called out to Junhyun from the kitchen, telling him that the food was ready right then and asking him to come over to eat. Junhyun soon came and sat down at the table with her. As they began eating together, he showed his gratitude for the food, expressing appreciation with a bright expression on his face. Nayeon watched him with a gentle smile and told him to eat a lot. He continued eating with visible excitement, clearly enjoying the flavors, and said that the food tasted really good. She looked up at him, asking if it was really this good, and then, with even more enthusiasm, he said that it was better than the food served in restaurants. With surprise and admiration in his tone, he asked her if she happened to work in a restaurant. Nayeon responded modestly, saying that he didn't have to praise her so much, but inwardly she was thinking to herself, with relief, that it was a good thing she had added more seasoning than usual. Junhyun looked at her quietly for a moment, thinking about how well she cooked and how clean and organized she kept her home. He noticed the way everything around the house looked luxurious, from the furniture to the smallest details. He couldn't help but think that she didn't even look like someone in her mid-30s. To him, she appeared youthful, elegant, and beautiful. The thought made him realize, with a bit of surprise, that he had actually been cardio training with someone who carried herself with such grace and maturity. He reflected that the only thing he could really be proud of was being younger than her. Nayeon blushed slightly, her expression softening as she said that it felt nice to receive such a compliment from him. Watching her reaction, Junhyun began to think more seriously about their situation. He wondered to himself if it was really all right for her to have workout sessions with him simply because he was younger than her. The thought lingered in his mind, and as he continued eating the food, that uncertainty quietly stayed with him. Then, all of a sudden, Nayeon spoke again, her tone carrying a hint of hesitation. She mentioned something about last time, and her words caught Junhyun by surprise. Before he could respond, she continued, saying that this kind of situation usually happened when two people were dating. She added that instead of spending time like this with an older woman, she was sure there must be someone out there who matched his standards better. At that moment, Junhyun began to realize what she was trying to say. Her tone was calm, but her meaning was clear. She then went on to say that she wouldn't ask him to forget about her, but hoped that he would keep this as a memory. Hearing those words, Junhyun understood that she was rejecting him, though she was trying to do it in a way that wouldn't hurt him deeply. He thought to himself that there was no way she would want to date someone as poor as him. He couldn't hold her back, just because he had enjoyed being with her so much. Even though he felt it was truly unfortunate, he decided that he would simply keep the memory of their last night together as something precious and meaningful to him. He told her that he understood her situation. In response, she smiled softly and told him that he was always welcome to lean on her whenever he wanted to. With a gentle and comforting expression, she added that until he found a girlfriend, she would be happy to stay by his side. Her words took him completely by surprise, leaving him momentarily speechless. After a short pause, he managed to reply with a quiet yes, though deep inside, his thoughts grew heavier. He began thinking that he shouldn't have any regrets about this. Seeking her only for workout sessions would become a burden on her, and it would be better to leave everything as a cherished memory rather than complicate things further. The next day, both of them attended class together, sitting among the other students and listening to the lecture. While taking notes, Junhyun couldn't help but glance at Nayeon's melons from time to time. As he watched her attentively listening to the instructor, he thought to himself that their time together now belonged to the past. It was only a memory for him. After the class ended, the two of them walked out together along with their friends, Mikyung and Soyoung. The group chatted casually as they made their way out of the building. Mikyung looked at Junhyun and commented that he looked so muscular, while Soyoung added that his shoulders were really wide. Nayeon also turned her gaze toward the weapon silently, her expression thoughtful. Later that evening, when Junhyun got home, he began shaking the protein bar. As he did, he found his thoughts drifting back to Nayeon. He thought to himself how unbelievable it was that the moments he had shared with her were now just memories. No matter how much he tried, he realized he couldn't get her out of his mind. He remembered the words she had told him, that he could come to her whenever he wanted. But now, he had already decided to give up on that. It hadn't even been a full day since he made that decision. Yet his thoughts kept returning to her. Just then, his phone suddenly started ringing. His heart skipped a beat as he thought that it might be Nayeon calling him. When he looked at the screen, however, he saw that the call was from Soyoung. He answered, and Soyoung asked if he had some free time at the moment. She explained that she had made too many side dishes and wanted to share them with him. Curious and a bit hesitant, he asked her if she was really okay with that. She told him that it was fine, saying it was difficult to finish everything alone and that it would be better if he came and helped her eat some of it. Grateful, he thanked her for the offer. After hanging up the call, he thought to himself that he shouldn't expect anything like the previous day to happen again. As he stepped outside, however, he unexpectedly ran into Nayeon. Later that night, Soyoung stood outside holding several food packages in her hands. She looked around quietly, thinking to herself that she didn't even understand her own actions. She wondered why she was standing there at such a late hour, trying to attract a younger man by bringing him food. She reassured herself, though, that her intentions weren't bad. She was just looking at him as someone pleasant to be around. A bit of eye candy, she thought with a faint smile. It simply made her feel better to see a young man with a healthy, athletic body up close. She reminded herself again that she had never had any improper intentions from the start. Just then, her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from Junhyun. In the message, he apologized, saying that something urgent had come up and that he would get the side dishes next time. Reading the message, Soyoung was taken aback, feeling both surprised and slightly disappointed. Meanwhile, on the other side, Junhyun was too occupied to reply further. He was in the middle of another intense wrestling battle with Nayeon. Nayeon's mind drifted as she sat alone in her home, absent-mindedly strengthening her finger muscles while her thoughts lingered on Junhyun. She had prepared some side dishes earlier and looked at them thoughtfully, telling herself that she was only going to give him a few. She tried to convince herself that he surely had no interest in an older woman like her, and that she wasn't expecting anything from him. She reminded herself that she had only gotten excited back then because it had been her first time doing cardio training with someone like him. As she got ready to leave, she picked up the side dishes and also carried a helmet in her hand. Looking at it, she thought quietly that by now he must have already forgotten about her. Still, she was also carrying a pack of helmets with her. When she arrived outside, it happened that Junhyun was also stepping out of his home at the same moment. The sudden encounter left both of them startled. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke until Nayeon quickly composed herself and explained that she had come to give him some side dishes. Just then, the helmet she had been holding slipped from her hands and fell to the ground. She bent down to pick it up, holding it close as she spoke again. She told him that she had brought it for him because he hadn't had one yesterday and seemed to be in difficulty at the time. She said there was no harm in keeping one for emergencies, and added with a faint, uneasy smile that he could now use it when spending time with younger girls instead of her. Before she could say anything more, Junhyun suddenly stepped closer to her. The unexpected gesture left her completely surprised when he leaned in and kissed her. Then, as the tension slowly melted away, the two of them once again found themselves engaging in their cardio training together. The next day, both of them went to the university together. When they entered the lecture hall, the professor had already begun addressing the class, her tone confident and steady as she discussed the topic for the day. As the professor continued explaining, she moved gracefully between the rows of desks, occasionally gesturing with her pen to emphasize a point. But then, as she made her way past Junhyun's desk, the pen suddenly slipped from her hand and rolled onto the floor. She immediately bent down to pick it up, but as she did, she accidentally bumped into Junhyun, who had been sitting nearby. The unexpected collision startled them both for a moment. Realizing her mistake, the professor quickly straightened up and apologized in a soft, embarrassed tone, saying that it was entirely her fault. The students around them began whispering and chuckling among themselves, with several of them playfully remarking that they wished they could have been in Junhyun's place. The professor tried to ignore their teasing and regained her composure, continuing the lecture. She asked everyone to put their phones on silent mode and reminded them that while she welcomed questions at any point during the class, they could also excuse themselves to the restroom if necessary. From her seat, Nayeon was watching the brief exchange closely. There was a faint, unsettled look in her eyes as she observed how naturally the professor interacted with Junhyun. A little while later, in the middle of the lecture, both Nayeon and Junhyun stood up and quietly made their way out of the room. Once outside, they headed toward the restroom, where they began their usual workout session together. While catching his breath, Junhyun mentioned that even though the professor had said it was fine to leave during the lecture, the action they were doing could be considered risky. He said that if someone happened to see them, it might raise suspicion. Nayeon smiled faintly and told him that he had seemed unusually focused and excited during the lecture earlier. After completing their cardio training, Nayeon looked at him and said that she would go ahead first, telling him to take his time before returning. He nodded in response, and as she walked away down the hallway, he found himself watching her quietly. There was a sense of admiration in his gaze, as if he was noticing for the first time how genuinely happy she looked in that moment. When the lecture ended and the students started leaving the classroom, Mikyung came up to the group and told them that someone had just asked for her phone number. Junhyun's eyes widened slightly in disbelief, and he asked if that had really happened. Mikyung laughed softly and teased him, saying that his reaction was too serious, almost as if he didn't believe her words. Junhyun tried to defend himself, saying that it wasn't like that at all. Soyoung, who had been standing nearby, joined in the conversation with a lighthearted tone, saying that she was jealous of Mikyung. Mikyung chuckled and then playfully teased Junhyun by touching her watermelons, smiling mischievously as she told him that she was only joking around and wanted to have a bit of fun. Junhyun froze for a brief moment, realizing the situation that had just happened. Inwardly, he thought that he had now touched another woman's orbs and wondered if such an action might be considered sus. The thought made him slightly uneasy. Nayeon, who had been observing from a short distance, saw his reaction and the light teasing between them. Her face reflected quiet disappointment, though she said nothing. Later that night, when Junhyun was back home, the quietness of his room was interrupted by the sound of a message notification. It was from Nayeon. The message said that she was standing in front of his house and asked him to let her in. From that point on, this pattern continued. Whenever they found a moment of free time, she would come to his home, and the two of them would continue their workout sessions together. He felt that her behavior carried a mature, grounded warmth, something that made him feel both reassured and understood. He silently hoped that life could continue like this for a long time. The next day, as he stepped outside the university building, Junhyun found himself reflecting on the past few days. He thought about how enjoyable it had been spending time with Nayeon, and how natural it felt being around her. A quiet smile touched his face, as he wondered if this sense of happiness was related to might feel like have a girlfriend. But almost immediately, another thought crossed his mind, that if he ever did get a girlfriend, he probably wouldn't be able to continue the cardio training with Nayeon the same way as before. He was still lost in these thoughts when, suddenly, a familiar voice called out his name from behind. It was Mikyung. He stopped walking and turned to look at her. She approached with a calm but curious expression and asked him directly if he had been doing cardio training with Nayeon. The question caught him completely off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless. Junhyun said that he did not quite understand Mikyung's words, admitting that her words were confusing to him. In response, Mikyung looked at him with a calm yet probing expression and asked directly whether he was dating Nayeon. At that moment, Junhyun felt a sudden tension inside him, realizing that he might have been completely caught. The thought flashed through his mind that if any rumors about this situation began to spread, things could become far worse than they already were. Just as he was about to say something in defense, Mikyung turned her back slightly and told him not to worry, assuring him that she would keep this matter a secret. Feeling uncertain, Junhyun asked whether she truly meant that. Mikyung smiled faintly and replied that she would, but only on one condition, that he would listen to her from now on. Junhyun's mind immediately began to race. He thought that perhaps she was about to demand something from him, maybe even to have their own cardio training sessions together. He felt a flicker of disbelief at the idea, but quickly realized that the situation had already crossed a line of normalcy. The thought that followed in his mind was a quiet sigh that, if this was reality, it was indeed a harsh one. A little later, he found himself carrying several shopping bags, his hands full, while Mikyung walked slightly ahead of him. She appeared cheerful. Turning toward him, she said that they should head to the next store. Breathing a little heavily under the weight of the bags, Junyeon asked if she planned to buy even more. Mikyung simply smiled and reminded him that he had agreed to do whatever she said for the entire weekend, and that if he refused, she might just let those rumors slip out. Junyeon admitted reluctantly that her words were true, but before he could finish, she interrupted him with a teasing tone, saying that he seemed too weak to carry the bags properly. She suggested that they should take a short break and go have something to drink. Her confident, commanding tone made him think to himself that her behavior was rather bossy, yet he followed along without complaint. After a while, both of them entered a small cafe nearby and found a place to sit. As they began sipping their drinks, Mikyung turned toward him and asked about his relationship with Nayeon. Junyeon hesitated for a moment, unsure how to answer, but before he could speak, she continued, saying that she wanted to make one thing very clear. If he was simply playing with Nayeon for some shallow reason, she would not tolerate it. Hearing that, Guhyun quickly explained that their relationship wasn't like that at all. He told her that it was more of an understanding, that they were together until one of them started dating someone else. Mikyung looked genuinely surprised by that answer. Seeing her expression, Junyeon grew nervous and began to elaborate, saying that this was the impression he had gotten from Nayeon herself, that she had told him she would help him practice until he eventually found a girlfriend. He said that this was simply how things had turned out between them. Mikyung listened silently for a moment, then smiled with a soft expression, saying that what he described sounded exactly like something Nayeon would do. Suddenly, her phone began to ring. She glanced at the screen, excused herself briefly, and answered the call. While she spoke, Junhyun watched her quietly and then asked whether she still doubted his words. Mikyung replied that it didn't seem like something a student would lie about, so she would believe him. She then spoke into the phone again, asking if a certain person was still at the office. After getting a reply, she mentioned that there was a cafe in front of the building and told the person to come by for a moment. A few minutes later, 2 office workers entered the cafe, and it became clear that Mikyung had called them there. She greeted them politely and asked them to take all the shopping bags to the office for her. With an apologetic smile, she told them that she was sorry for making them run errands, but she would make sure both of them received a bonus for their effort. The 2 workers nodded respectfully, calling her boss, and thanked her before leaving with the bags. Mikyung turned back to Junyeon and smiled, saying that now their load had been lightened and that it was much better this way. She then said that there was still one more place they should visit and told him to come along with her. Junyeon followed her without complaint, though his thoughts were drifting. He had a strange feeling that they were heading somewhere unusual, since earlier they had been visiting only fancy stores, and he couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she spent money, almost as if it meant nothing. From the way she carried herself and the kind of places she chose, he began to suspect that she might be far wealthier than he had ever imagined, perhaps even living alone in a luxurious studio apartment. After some time, they finally arrived at another shop, and when Junyeon stepped inside, he realized with surprise that it was a men's clothing store. He turned toward Mikyung with confusion written all over his face and asked if this really was a men's store. Mikyung nodded with a confident smile and replied that he was right. She had brought him there because she intended to buy clothes for him. He appeared extremely surprised by the situation, his expression filled with nervousness and uncertainty. His voice trembled slightly as he admitted that he didn't have enough money to afford Ford's expensive clothes. She, noticing his discomfort, smiled softly and told him not to worry about it at all, saying that she would buy the clothes for him herself. He tried to refuse her offer, insisting that even so, he could not just accept such things for free. The idea of receiving something without giving anything in return felt wrong to him. However, she calmly responded that a mature woman like her was buying them for him, so he should just accept them quietly. She reminded him of the promise they had made that he would listen to her for the entire weekend, and with a slightly teasing tone, she told him that he was such a good boy for keeping his word. After that, he began trying on some of the clothes from the store. Each time he came out of the fitting room, she looked at him with interest, observing how the clothes suited him. When he wore one particular outfit, she commented that it looked very nice on him and suggested that they should buy it. As he continued trying on one outfit after another, she approved of each one with satisfaction, asking the salesperson to pack all of them without hesitation. Once everything had been selected, she proceeded to make the payment, and after settling the bill that had amounted to 10,000 won, she mentioned that they should head back now. He stood frozen for a moment, completely shocked by the enormous amount. His thoughts became tangled as he silently told himself not to look at the price tags. He couldn't understand the reason she was doing all of this. Inside his mind, he wondered if something was wrong with her, because it didn't seem possible that she would spend so much on him without expecting anything in return. He began to suspect that maybe she had some hidden reason behind her actions. Perhaps she was trying to use this as leverage, a way to pressure him or manipulate him into breaking up with Naeon. On their way back, she turned to him and asked whether he was feeling uncomfortable. He replied quietly that he was not. She then smiled slightly and said that it made sense because he probably thought that the two of them would end up alone for the weekend, using one excuse after another to spend time together until they became completely exhausted. For a moment, his imagination ran wild, and he felt a rush of excitement just thinking about her actions. Then he quickly realized where his mind had gone and felt embarrassed. He wondered to himself whether he had truly imagined such a thing. Feeling flustered, he apologized to her right away. She responded in a light, teasing tone, saying that he had mentioned before that he was still practicing and that it would be nice if everyone were as gentle as Naeon. But when it came to someone a little more assertive or forceful like her, she warned that he might find himself struggling a bit. Still confused, he asked her about her words. She smiled faintly and explained that she was referring to the workout practice they had talked about before, and that it would be helpful if he could assist her with that. Meanwhile, on the other side, Nayeon was serving a cup of tea to Soyoung. The aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the room as Soyoung accepted the cup with a polite thank you. Nayeon looked at her curiously and asked the reason she had come without giving any prior notice or calling beforehand. Soyoung sat there with a nervous look on her face, her expression uncertain and slightly uneasy, as if she was hiding something she wasn't ready to say. Later that night, Junyeon and Mikyung ended up in a motel. Junyeon sat on the edge of the bed, lost deep in thought. He reminded himself that he had agreed to do whatever she told him for the entire weekend. A sense of tension filled him as he wondered about the situation that might happen if he somehow annoyed her. Part of him feared that she might do something unpredictable or rash, but then he realized that this fear was only an excuse. The truth was that he didn't really want to avoid the situation. In fact, a part of him was drawn to it, unable to resist what was about to unfold. Suddenly, Mikyung stepped out of the bathroom. She looked at him and told him to go and take a shower. As she continued speaking in a playful and suggestive tone, she seemed to be deliberately making him excited about the idea of having a workout session with her. He could sense that her words carried a teasing undertone, almost as if she were testing his loyalty to Nayeon. Deep inside, he told himself that he needed to refuse her offer directly and maintain his boundaries, even if it meant going against the situation in front of him. Determined, he thought that he should reject her with firmness in his eyes. However, despite all his internal resistance and hesitation, he found himself unable to refuse her in the end. Eventually, he gave in to her invitation and ended up participating in the cardio training session with her. On the other side, Soyoung was sitting with Nayeon, appearing hesitant yet serious. She began by saying that there was something very personal she wanted to ask. Nayeon looked quite surprised upon hearing that and waited for her to continue. After a brief pause, Soyoung carefully said that although she didn't think it was true, she wanted to ask whether Nayeon was dating Junyeon. Nayeon's expression immediately changed at the question. She grew slightly nervous, but quickly composed herself and denied it completely, saying that it wasn't true. Soyoung responded by saying that it made sense, but added that Mikyung had been saying some strange things lately. Nayeon then remarked that Mikyung must be completely mistaken about her. In her mind, Nayeon reassured herself that she wasn't actually lying. She wasn't dating him, and everything she had told Mikyung was technically true since they had only been doing workout sessions together. Still, she noticed that Soyoung seemed visibly relieved and genuinely happy after hearing her denial. Meanwhile, on the other side, Mikyung's daughter kept trying to call her repeatedly, but Mikyung wasn't responding. She was completely absorbed in her cardio training with Junhyun and didn't even notice her phone ringing. During the training session, Junhyun, feeling curious, asked her if she was a divorced woman. She confirmed calmly that she was, explaining that she had a daughter who was now in high school. She mentioned with a gentle smile that she had her daughter when she was around his age and commented that the girl had grown up to be very pretty. Hearing that, Junhyun asked her the reason she hadn't remarried after all these years. Mikyung looked at him for a moment, then smiled faintly and replied in a quiet, playful tone that the reason for that was a secret. The next day at the university, Naeun approached Junhyun and asked him if he was planning to go on the upcoming trip. Her question caught him off guard, and he looked at her with surprise, asking if it was already that time of year again. Standing beside Naeun was her friend, who seemed to be encouraging her quietly, nudging her to continue the conversation with him. Nayeon explained that the department representative had asked her to confirm the number of participants for the trip and that she was in charge of collecting that information. Hearing that, Junhyun began thinking about the trip and sighed inwardly. The memories of past college trips weren't exactly pleasant for him, as he didn't have any particularly good experiences from them. Just then, Nayeon, Mikyung, and Soyoung joined the group. Nayeon, noticing their conversation, asked about their conversation. Junyeon turned to her and said that she had arrived just in time. They were discussing the headcount for the trip and checking who was planning to attend. Nayeon added that they hoped to have as many people participate as possible this time. Her friend, who was standing beside her, glanced at the older women and couldn't help but notice how striking their balloons looked, thinking to herself that they were unexpectedly large. Hearing the mention of the trip, Nayeon's expression changed slightly, and she spoke in a somewhat disheartened tone, saying that perhaps women like them, referring to themselves as ahjumas, might end up being a burden on a trip filled with younger students. Mikyung, however, quickly disagreed and said confidently that everyone would surely love to have beautiful ladies like them along. Nayeon gave her a curious look and asked if Mikyung really thought they still counted as beautiful ladies. Mikyung laughed softly and replied that, of course, they did. They hadn't lost to the younger ones just yet. Nayeon then turned toward Junhyun and asked whether he was planning to go on the trip. For a moment, he fell silent, thinking about it. The thought of a college trip brought back memories he would rather forget, unpleasant ones that had stayed with him. But after glancing at the two women standing beside him, he thought that maybe, with these two beautiful ladies, he could overwrite those bad memories with better ones. Finally, he responded that yes, he was going to join the trip. At that moment, Naeun's friend, whose name was Siona, stepped forward and spoke to him. She said that in that case, she had a small favor to ask. Since they needed to buy several things for the trip, she asked if he could come along with them to help. Meanwhile, Mikyung appeared slightly worried, thinking quietly to herself that her husband might not allow her to go on the trip at all. Naeun then turned to Seona with a nervous expression and said that the two of them would be fine together. But Seona shook her head and said that she had something urgent to take care of and might not be able to go shopping with her. Naeun hesitated for a moment before saying that in that case, she could go alone. However, Seona pointed out that there would be a lot of items to carry and insisted that Naeun wouldn't be able to handle everything on her own. Listening to their exchange, Junyeon thought to himself that they should at least consider asking for his opinion. After a moment of hesitation, he spoke up and offered to accompany Naeun, saying that he had free time and could go with her if she felt comfortable with it. Naeun smiled and said that of course, she felt very comfortable with him, and in that case, she would treat him to a cup of coffee in return for his help. Seona, who had been listening to their conversation nearby, looked quite cheerful and amused. In her thoughts, she jokingly grumbled that Noon should be treating her to coffee instead. Junhyun responded politely to Noon, saying that there was no need for her to treat him. He said he didn't mind helping her and that she shouldn't worry about it at all. His tone was gentle and considerate, showing that he didn't expect anything in return. After some time, once they had finished buying everything needed for the trip, Junhyun and Nayeon decided to take a short break and went to a nearby cafe. Sitting across from each other with cups of coffee in front of them, Junhyun let out a light sigh and commented that there had been a lot more to prepare than he had expected. He added that if Naeun and Sona had tried to handle all of it on their own, it would have been very difficult for them. Naeun nodded and replied that everyone else had been busy, so they didn't have much choice but to do it themselves. Hearing that, Junhyun leaned back slightly, thinking to himself that he hadn't realized it would take so long to finish everything. He thought that even though he helped, it probably just made him look like a reliable senior who could be depended on. He then wondered if he had refused to help, he would probably be doing wrestling practice with Nayeon and Mikyung at that moment instead. He smiled faintly at the thought and told himself that he didn't want to waste time on something that felt so unproductive. Just then, Naeun suddenly asked him if he had a girlfriend. The question caught him off guard, and he looked at her with curiosity, asking the reason she wanted to know. Naeun hesitated briefly before explaining that she wanted to ask for his phone number, but if he already had a girlfriend, it might make things awkward or cause trouble. Her honesty made him smile slightly, and as he looked at her, he couldn't help but think that she was incredibly cute. He then told her that no, he didn't have a girlfriend. Later that evening, when he returned home, he kept thinking about the conversation at the cafe. He realized that her question and smile had felt like a green light, a small signal of interest. He told himself that although he enjoyed spending time with the older women, the Ajumas, Nain had a completely different kind of charm. Her youthful energy, soft voice, and the way her hair framed her face gave her a fresh appeal that was hard to ignore. In his thoughts, he admitted that he would like to have more cardio sessions with someone like her rather than with the older ladies. However, as he reached his home and was about to step inside, he was startled to see that the main door was already open. He froze in surprise when he saw Naeun sitting inside, waiting for him. She looked at him calmly and asked if he had fun. When he hesitated, she repeated herself more firmly, asking again if he had enjoyed himself. Junyeon was shocked by her sudden presence and didn't know how to respond. She gave him a sharp look and said that it seemed he had enjoyed spending time with that young girl more than with an Ahjuma like her. Embarrassed, he quickly tried to explain, saying that they had only gone out to buy supplies for the trip, nothing more. Naeun looked at him closely and told him to be safe. The way she emphasized the word made him pause in confusion, surprised by the tone of her voice. Then, before he could say anything else, she leaned closer and began sniffing near him teasingly, saying that he smelled excited, as if something had happened. She remarked that it seemed like he had been following Naeun with a little too much enthusiasm. He denied it immediately, insisting that nothing like that had happened. Naeun then warned him firmly that he was not allowed to have any more workout sessions with Naeun. Junyeon looked at her and nodded silently, thinking that she was probably right. A moment later, both of them moved to begin their usual workout session together. On the other side, Nan was lying on her bed, looking extremely excited as she thought about how much she had talked with Junhyun that day. While staring at her phone, she noticed his contact number on the screen and began wondering if she should try to message him. She debated with herself, thinking that if she sent him a message and he saw it, he might think about her too. Eventually, she decided to send him a text and waited eagerly for his reply, wondering if he might be busy at that moment. Junhyun did receive her message, but he was too occupied with his wrestling match against Nayeon to check his phone. During the match, his thoughts drifted briefly. He told himself that he didn't really need a girlfriend or any kind of complicated relationship. The thing he liked about Naeun was her bright and cheerful personality, yet he felt it was obvious that he would still choose Naeon in the end, since he could do workout training with her anytime he wanted. Meanwhile, Mikyung was at her house searching for some fabrics online. She felt irritated, thinking that some young girl was getting involved with the man she considered hers. She told herself that she would outshine that girl with a beauty and charm that the younger one could never imagine having at her age. Afterwards, Mikyung clicked buy several dresses, but as she looked at them, she wondered if they were too flashy for someone her age. She then thought about how Junyeon was always so eager for workout sessions and that he might even perform better than before. The thought made her look forward to seeing him again. After Nayeon had finished her cardio training with Junhyun, she appeared visibly upset. Junhyun noticed her expression and assumed that she might be angry because he had met Nayeon, thinking that perhaps jealousy was the reason for her behavior. When the session ended, Nayeon told him curtly that she was leaving. He asked where she was going, and she replied that she was heading home. At that moment, he finally realized that she was truly upset with him. On the other side, Soyoung was at her home, standing beside her husband's bed while nervously clutching her hands together. In a soft and hesitant tone, she asked him for permission to join a trip, explaining that everyone from the university was going and that she had been thinking it would be nice if she could go along with them too. Her husband looked at her with a puzzled expression, clearly surprised by her words. She explained with a small smile that it was a university trip, something all the students were attending. However, his reaction was not what she had hoped for. He frowned slightly and told her that she seemed to be mistaken about something. Before she could say anything in response, he continued speaking in a calm but firm tone, telling her that she was a housewife before being a university student, and that spending a night away from home could give people the wrong impression. He reminded her that she should also think about Sunghoon, since without her, there would be no one left at home to cook or take care of him. Feeling embarrassed and disappointed, Soyoung lowered her gaze and murmured that he was right. She apologized quietly. Her husband turned his attention back to the book he had been reading and, without looking up, said that he was already being understanding enough by allowing her to study in the city. He added that she should also wear more appropriate and modest clothing, saying that Sunghoon had grown up now and that she should feel ashamed of wearing certain things at her age. Hearing those words made her feel even smaller. She simply nodded and said, "Okay." A faint look of disappointment crossed her face as she quietly lay down beside him. She closed her eyes, pretending to sleep, but her mind refused to rest. She turned to the side again and again, unable to stop the thoughts flooding her head. As she lay there in the dimly lit room, she began to think bitterly that her husband had never contributed a single dime toward her tuition fees. It angered her that he acted as if he cared about the family and their reputation when, in reality, he was the one neglecting everything. She realized that the thing truly bothered him was not concern for her or the household. It was the fear of losing control over her. That realization stung deeply. She thought about how lonely she had become, not because of anyone outside, but because of the cold distance that had grown inside their own home. Her mind drifted to memories of the past, wondering when she had last felt loved by him. She remembered a time when she didn't need anyone's approval except his, but even that connection felt long gone. A quiet regret filled her chest as she thought that if she had properly given those side dishes to Junhyun back then, perhaps things might have gone differently. Maybe if she had ended up doing cardio training with him, her life might have taken another path, one that was warmer and less lonely than the present she was living in now. The next day at the university, Junhyun was sitting in class next to Nayeon. Wanting to ease the awkwardness between them, he turned slightly toward her and tried to start a light conversation by mentioning how nice the weather was that day. However, Nayeon didn't respond at all. She simply turned her face to the other side, avoiding his gaze completely. Seeing her reaction, felt a wave of confusion and regret wash over him. He began to think to himself that he must have done something to upset her. Even if he wanted to apologize, he didn't know about the mistake he had made in the first place. His thoughts became heavy as he wondered the reason she seemed so cold to him. He didn't want her to keep hating him, but at that moment, he felt completely lost. Nayeon, meanwhile, was trying her best not to look at him, though her eyes occasionally shifted in his direction. She was silently battling with her feelings, thinking that she couldn't even meet his eyes. If he realized that she had been jealous, he would find out that she liked him, and she feared that such a confession would only make him angry or distant. Across the same classroom, Mikyung and Soyoung were also sitting quietly next to each other. Suddenly, Mikyung took out her phone and sent a message to Junhyun, suggesting that they all go out together for grilled pork belly after class. She wrote that the meal would be her treat. When Junhyun received the message, he looked at his phone and thought that this might be a perfect chance to make up with Nayeon, to fix the tension that had grown between them. He was about to ask Nayeon about it, but before he could say anything, she suddenly spoke up. Without even looking at him, she said sharply that she wasn't going. She told him to go enjoy himself and not to worry about her, adding sarcastically that he should take Nayeon with him instead, since Mikyung would probably like that idea as well. Her words hit him like a shock. He froze for a moment, realizing that things had gotten worse than he thought. Nayeon was truly angry with him. On the other hand, Nayeon tried to reassure herself that she had acted maturely and hadn't meant anything wrong by her words, though her expression betrayed her frustration. Just then, the professor entered the classroom, instantly shifting the atmosphere. She looked around and asked if everyone was present. Then, addressing the class, she instructed the class representative to make copies of the papers she had brought. After that, she announced that she would start taking attendance. At night, Soyoung and Junhyun went to the restaurant where Mikyung had invited them for a pork belly treat. Soyoung seemed distracted, her expression filled with quiet worry. As the three of them sat together, she sighed softly and said that she would not be able to go on the trip after all. Mikyung looked at her with clear frustration in her eyes. Her tone turned sharp as she commented that Soyoung's husband was really something else, acting as though a single night away from home was such a big issue. Her annoyance was visible, but Soyoung just lowered her gaze, and she quietly said that her husband was not entirely wrong either. Mikyung frowned and leaned slightly closer, saying that Soyoung shouldn't try to cover up for him all the time. She asked sarcastically if it was really because her husband couldn't make food for himself, or if there was another reason behind it. Soyoung shook her head gently and explained that it wasn't what Mikyung thought. She said softly that it was simply because spending a night away from home didn't look good in other people's eyes. It could be easily misunderstood. Junhyun, who had been listening to their conversation in silence, finally spoke with a small smile, saying that her husband must really care about her. He added that if he had a beautiful wife like her, he would probably be worried too if she wanted to spend the night away. Hearing that, Soyoung froze for a moment, surprised by his words. Her cheeks turned slightly red, but before she could say anything, Mikyung interrupted, her tone suddenly changing as she said she needed to step out for a smoke. She asked Junhyun if he wanted to come along. He hesitated, glancing at Soyoung, and said that if he went, Soyoung would be left sitting alone. Mikyung, however, brushed it off impatiently and said, "Enough with the chit-chat," and asked him to come with her. Junhyun nodded reluctantly and turned to Soyoung, telling her that he would be right back. As he left the table, Soyoung sat still, her hands resting on her lap and her mind replaying his words over and over again. She couldn't help but think to herself, almost in disbelief, that he had just called her beautiful. Outside the restaurant, Mikyung stood with Junhyun under the dim streetlight. She exhaled a puff of smoke and said in a serious tone that he needed to be careful with his words. Junhyun looked puzzled, not fully understanding her words. Seeing his confusion, she frowned slightly and told him that he didn't know enough about the situation and shouldn't speak so thoughtlessly. Her tone carried a trace of concern when she added that he had no idea about Soyoung's husband. Junhyun's expression turned more serious, and he asked her quietly if something bad had happened between them. Mikyung paused for a moment as if debating whether to say more, and finally admitted that something had indeed happened. But before she could continue, her phone suddenly buzzed. She looked at the screen. After a short moment, she told him that she was sorry, but had something urgent to take care of and would have to leave right away. Junhyun was surprised and asked if she was really leaving already. Mikyung nodded and took out a card from her purse, handing it to him while saying that he should pay the bill with it. She added that he could use it anywhere else if he needed to. Then, in a more serious tone, she told him that Soyoung must be in a very bad mood right now, so he should take care of her properly and not say anything stupid. Junhyun accepted the card quietly and said that he understood. When he looked at it, he noticed that it was a black card, which made him even more surprised. Mikyung waved for a taxi, got inside quickly, and left. Standing there for a few seconds, Junhyun thought about her words. He began to wonder if there really was something wrong between Soyoung and her husband, something serious enough that they were no longer on good terms. After thinking for a moment, he went back inside the restaurant. When he entered, Soyoung was still sitting there, waiting for him. She looked up as soon as he returned, her expression curious and a little concerned, and asked the reason it had taken him so long to come back. After Junhyun returned to the restaurant, Soyoung looked at him curiously and asked about Mikyung, wondering the reason she had left so suddenly. Junhyun explained calmly that Mikyung had said something urgent had come up and that she had told them to continue eating without her. He also mentioned that she had asked them to pay the bill using her black card. Hearing that, Soyoung nodded slightly and said, "Okay," in a quiet voice, though she still seemed lost in thought. After a short pause, Junhyun looked a little uneasy and apologized to her for his words he had said earlier. His expression turned sincere as he admitted that his words might have been careless. Soyoung tilted her head slightly and asked about that, saying that she didn't quite understand. Junyeon hesitated for a moment before speaking again. He explained that he had heard from Mikyung Ajuma that Soyoung's husband was not a very good person. He said that he felt sorry for speaking thoughtlessly earlier when he didn't even know her full story. With a genuine tone, he told her that he was willing to do anything he could to make up for it, asking her to forgive him. Soyoung looked at him for a moment, observing his expression. In her mind, she began wondering if he truly meant his words, whether he was really ready to do anything for her or if he was just speaking out of guilt. She thought to herself that maybe he had no idea about the kind of demand she could make if she wanted to, or if perhaps she wouldn't ask for anything at all and would simply watch how he reacted. Her thoughts grew hazy as she considered whether she should test him by asking for something subtle, something that would reveal how he truly felt. But then, realizing where her thoughts were going, she quickly shook her head slightly and reminded herself not to think that way. Breaking the silence, she suddenly looked up and asked with a smile if he would like to become her drinking partner for the evening. Her unexpected offer made Junhyun brighten up immediately. His eyes showed a hint of excitement as he nodded and called the waiter over, saying cheerfully that they would like a bottle of soju. A little later, as the two of them shared drinks, Soyoung began opening up about her past. Her tone softened as she started talking about her story and her marriage. She told him that her husband had been chosen for her in a rushed marriage that her parents had pushed her into. They had been against her continuing her university studies, insisting that she should focus on her role as a wife instead. There were, she said, many other things that had gone wrong since then, so many that she could hardly remember when things had last felt normal. Listening attentively, Junhyun eventually asked her in a quiet, hesitant voice whether her husband had ever cheated on her. The question made her pause for a moment. Then, with a deep sigh, she admitted that yes, he had. She explained that she had found out not directly from him, but from a friend who had told her the truth. Even before that, she confessed she had already sensed that something was wrong, something distant in the way he spoke and acted toward her. She said softly that she hadn't known how to describe it at the time, only that she had felt anxious and uneasy, fearing that he might one day ask for a divorce. It wasn't only love that she was worried about losing, and more than that, she had been afraid for the sake of the child she was about to have back then. Hearing that, Junyeon asked gently whether her husband had ever apologized to her for his actions. At this, Soyoung let out a short, bitter laugh, and she told him that there had been no apology at all. Then, almost as if reliving the moment, she said that he would be shocked to hear that her husband had actually said that day. She explained that on the very day she caught him cheating, he came home as if nothing had happened, looked at her and told her that he wanted dinner. He didn't show any guilt or shame. He simply asked her to pretend that nothing had happened. The most unbelievable part, she added with a quiet, ironic smile, was that he dared to ask her to cook for him. She laughed faintly and said that strangely, it was almost funny. After a while, Soyoung suddenly lowered her head onto the table, her forehead resting on her folded arms. Concerned, Junhyun immediately leaned forward and asked softly if she was feeling all right. With a faint, weary smile, she murmured that she sometimes wondered if, even just once, she might ever be loved by someone, truly and sincerely. Junhyun looked at her for a moment, slightly taken aback by her words, before responding in a gentle tone. He told her that, at the very least, he liked her. And, of course, Mikyung and Nayeon Ahjuma too, since they were her friends and cared about her. Hearing this, Soyoung raised her head slightly and asked if he was really telling the truth. Then, with a half-dazed but playful tone, she suddenly told him to show her his weapon. For a moment, Junhyun froze, feeling confused and uncertain if he had misunderstood her words. But as he looked at her, he slowly began to realize that this was actually the thing she was implying, the very thing she was demanding. Meanwhile, on the other side, Mikyung had already returned home. Her daughter was lying on the bed, pretending to be ill, groaning softly as if in pain. Mikyung looked at her and sighed in frustration, saying that she was making far too much fuss and wasn't even a little kid anymore. However, her daughter replied weakly that her body was hurting and that she felt scared being alone at home. Mikyung, not paying much attention to her words, asked if she had eaten and whether she could cook some porridge for herself. Her daughter nodded slightly and said yes, but added that it would be better to order delivery food because her cooking wasn't good. Mikyung became irritated and shouted that she should just eat whatever she made herself. Then, Trying to calm her frustration, she went into the kitchen. As she picked up her phone, a notification appeared from her bank. She opened it and realized that a payment had been made for the pork belly meal, and another deduction had appeared for a one-night motel stay. Without wasting time, she called Junhyun to ask about it. When he answered, he explained that Soyoung Ajuma had said she was feeling too dizzy, and even when he got her a taxi, she said she couldn't ride it. So he told Mikyung they decided to take a short rest first before he would take her home. Mikyung, clearly irritated and suspicious, warned him in a firm tone that she was saying this just in case. He should not touch her, since she was a married woman. Junhyun quickly replied that he knew that very well, and that she didn't need to worry. After that, he hung up the phone. As he set his phone down, he recalled Mikyung's strict warning not to touch Soyoung. Inwardly, he reminded himself again that she was married and even had a grown-up child, and that she was different from Mikyung and Nayeon Ajuma. While these thoughts were running through his mind, the bathroom door opened and Soyoung stepped out. With a faint smile, she told him that she had finished taking a shower, and then reminding him of her earlier words, she said that as promised, he should now show her the weapon. Hearing that, Junhyun felt his heart race and thought to himself anxiously that perhaps he might not be able to get through this situation unharmed. Junhyun looked at Soyoung for a moment, his expression turning serious. He took a deep breath and said that he wanted her to promise him something first. She looked at him curiously, not understanding his words. He hesitated for a moment before confessing that he was about to lose all sense of reason right now. His voice trembled slightly as he said it, and Soyoung's eyes widened in surprise at his sudden honesty. Trying to keep control of himself, Junhyun continued, saying that if he tried to make a move on her, she had to promise that she would slap him in the face as hard as she could. She blinked, trying to comprehend his words, but before she could respond, he emphasized again that she had to understand clearly. Soyoung, confused and flustered, stopped him, asking him to wait for a moment and demanding to know the reason behind his words. Junhyun, looking conflicted, replied that she had to fulfill her promise, but also added in a low voice that the situation was simply too inconvenient right now. After that exchange, both of them shifted their focus and began engaging in cardio training together. Meanwhile, on the other side, Soyoung's husband, whose name was Soyun, returned home from the office. As he stepped through the doorway, he called out that he was back, but immediately noticed that the door had been left slightly open. Frowning, he repeated his greeting louder, saying again that he was home, yet no one appeared to welcome him. After a few moments, his son Sung-hoon came out of his room and asked with a casual tone if his father was already back. Soyoon asked him where his mother was, and Sung-hoon replied that she had said she was going out with her friends. Hearing that, Soyoon's face darkened with irritation. He muttered in frustration that it was far too late for her to be out, especially after leaving their child home alone. Angrily, he began dialing her number while pacing across the room. Sung-hoon, on the other hand, looked relaxed and quietly thought to himself that he didn't really mind, since it meant he could continue playing games without interruption. As the phone rang without an answer, Soyoon grumbled under his breath, saying that, as he had expected, he never should have allowed her to go to university. He muttered that she was getting influenced by bad habits, and that a housewife ought to behave more decently, with dignity and restraint. Back at the motel, Soyoung remained entirely unaware of her husband's calls. She was fully engaged in the intense workout session with Junhyun, the sound of their movements filling the quiet room while her phone lay silent on the nearby table. The next morning, Soyoung quietly left the motel. When she reached her house, she hesitated for a brief moment before unlocking the door. As soon as she stepped inside, she froze. Her husband was already sitting on the couch, waiting for her with a stern expression. Without giving her a chance to move any further, he raised his voice and told her to stop right there. Soyoung stood still, clutching her bag tightly, and asked him softly whether he hadn't gone to work yet, adding that it was only just the morning after all. Her husband's tone suddenly grew louder as he shouted at her, asking if she had completely lost her mind. He demanded to know the reason she hadn't answered his calls, saying that he had tried reaching her many times the previous night. His words made her tense and shocked, her expression stiffening as he continued to scold her. He accused her of staying out all night without informing him, and questioned whether she even remembered that she was a housewife, not just some ordinary woman who could come and go as she pleased. He went on to say bitterly that after everything she had done, she should not have come home at all. Then, with a glare, he muttered that sending her to university had clearly been a mistake from the very beginning. Soyoung stood there silently, looking down, her face showing traces of sadness and disappointment. Her husband's eyes narrowed as he noticed her appearance and asked coldly, reason she was wearing makeup. She lifted her head slightly and replied with a faint, tired voice that it only showed how little attention he ever paid to her. He never even looked at her face when they spoke. Her mind drifted back to earlier that morning when she had stopped by a salon for a makeover. She remembered the makeup artist looking at her reflection in the mirror and asking gently if she was having a bad day. The stylist had remarked that her expression didn't look very cheerful, even while her hair was being cut. Soyoung had simply smiled faintly and said that it was nothing, insisting that she wasn't sad at all. In fact, she claimed that she was feeling freer than she had in a long time. Later, after that heated argument with her husband, Soyoung arrived at the university, still visibly drained but determined. When she met her friends, she told them firmly that she had decided to get a divorce. Her words immediately caught Mi-kyung and Nayeon's attention, both of them staring at her with surprise. Mi-kyung asked if she was truly serious about it, and Soyoung nodded, saying that she had tried to explain everything to her husband, but he had refused to listen and kicked her out, telling her that he didn't want to hear another word. Nayeon asked quietly if nothing had been resolved in the end, and Soyoung shook her head, saying, not exactly, but at least she had finally found the courage to express her true feelings. She added that although it might take time and effort to convince him, she had resolved herself completely to see it through to the end. She was determined to get the divorce in every situation and even fight for full custody of her child, no matter how long it took. Nayeon sighed softly and commented that such intense lines sounded like something that would never appear in an ordinary campus story. Meanwhile, Mi-kyung leaned closer to Junyeon and whispered into his ear, asking quietly whether he had done the workout session with Soyoung. Her sudden question made him stiffen in surprise, but he quickly tried to control his expression and replied calmly that he hadn't. Mi-kyung gave him a sharp look and said that he had stayed out the entire night, reminding him how difficult it had been for her to keep covering for Soyoung by creating alibis and managing her husbands multiple times. She said that there was absolutely no way such a drastic change in Soyoung's attitude could have happened without a specific reason behind it. After a short while, Junhyun finally admitted the truth, quietly saying yes. Mi-kyung gave a knowing smile and crossed her arms, remarking in a teasing yet sharp tone that it took more courage than she had expected for him to engage in a wrestling battle with a married woman. Soyoung, trying to ease the moment, smiled faintly and said that in any case, she believed she would be able to join the upcoming trip after all, explaining that her parents had agreed to take care of her child while she was away. Mi-kyung laughed lightly and asked with amusement if that trip was really so important that she was going to all this trouble for it. Nayeon, unable to hold back her comment, added playfully that anyone overhearing them might think Soyoung was getting divorced just for the sake of going on that trip. While the three women were talking, Junhyun stood nearby, quietly listening to their conversation. His face showed a mix of confusion and surprise. His thoughts began to drift back to the night before, and he couldn't help but think how unexpected the situation had become. He reflected that after they had parted ways the previous night, he had assumed Soyoung would simply pretend as though nothing had ever happened between them. Yet now, here she was, confidently dressed up, looking brighter and stronger than before, and even talking about her divorce with such determination. He found himself thinking that she truly seemed serious about her decision. Suddenly, Soyoung appeared from behind and lightly grabbed him by the shirt, calling his name to get his attention. He turned around quickly, startled, and she leaned closer, speaking softly that there was something important she wanted to say to him in private. She asked if they could meet after class to talk, just the two of them, and her expression made it clear that it was something serious. When the class ended, Junyeon kept his word and helped Soyoung move her belongings into another apartment. He carried a few heavy boxes and glanced around, commenting that she seemed to have far more luggage than he had imagined. She smiled awkwardly and apologized, saying it was indeed too much for her to handle on her own. He nodded and said that it must have been hard for her to leave her home behind, then asked where she planned to stay from now on. Soyoung explained that Mi-kyung had arranged a place for her and that she would be living there for a while until things settled down. Junhyun commented that it was very convenient for her to have a friend like Mi-kyung to rely on. He then asked about her son, curious about her decision for him. Soyoung replied that she was leaving her son with her parents for the time being, saying that they had missed their grandson and that he listened to them well. Junhyun nodded, saying that it was a relief to hear that. Still, Soyoung added quietly that even it would be better for a child to have his father by his side. Her words made Junhyun tense up slightly, his eyes narrowing as if to read the meaning behind her tone. She turned toward him then, smiling gently, and said that a good man should be someone exactly like him. Her comment left him stunned for a moment, his face flushing in confusion. But before he could say anything, she let out a small laugh, brushing off her own words as a lighthearted joke. She said that he still had a bright future ahead of him, and that there were plenty of women much better suited for him than an older woman like herself. Junyon, distracted by the weight of her words, absent-mindedly looked down at the weapon. Lost in thought, he apologized and asked her to repeat her words, realizing that he hadn't heard her clearly because he had been caught staring into her headlights. Soyoung simply smiled and said that her husband would probably be returning home soon, then suggested that they could do a short workout session there before she had to leave. Junhyun agreed to Soyoung's suggestion, and both of them began their wrestling training together inside her husband's home. Meanwhile, at that very same time, Soyoung's husband was sitting in his office, lost deep in thought. He thought about how much Soyoung had changed ever since she started attending university. In his memory, she had always been a quiet and obedient woman, the kind who never argued, never questioned, and certainly never talked about things like divorce. He muttered to himself that this was not the same woman he used to know. For the first time, he began to wonder if she might be seeing someone else. The very idea made him frown, yet he immediately dismissed it with a bitter smile. No, he thought, there's no way. She's the kind of woman who couldn't even kill a bug, let alone cheat. He reassured himself that she must have been emotional or confused, that eventually she would come back to her senses, apologize, and ask him to forget about the idea of divorce. He imagined her clinging to him again, just like before, and convincing him to take her back. Still, a flicker of pride crossed his face as he muttered that even if she was attending university, there was no way any of those young male students would ever be interested in an older, married woman like her. In his mind, that thought settled everything, and he convinced himself that nothing serious could possibly happen. The next day at the university, Soyoung was standing with Naeun in the hallway, her mood much brighter than before. She told Naeun that she was planning to go on the upcoming trip. Naeun looked at her with wide eyes and said that she is going to write down her name on trip list. Soyoung simply smiled and said, a few steps away, Mikyung and Naeun were standing together. They exchanged cheerful glances, both smiling in excitement as Mikyung said that it was going to be such a fun trip now that everyone was coming along. Naeun nodded in agreement, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. All the students in the class looked busy and full of excitement as they discussed the upcoming trip among themselves and with Naeun. Their voices overlapped in cheerful tones, everyone saying that the trip was happening tomorrow and that it was going to be a lot of fun. Junyeon sat quietly among them, observing the lively scene. He thought to himself that everyone seemed to be in such high spirits because of the trip. Watching them brought back memories of his own first college trip when he had felt the same kind of excitement. He remembered how he had gone without expecting anything special to happen, yet so many unexpected things had unfolded back then. As he thought about it, a small smile appeared on his face, and he felt that maybe this time too, he would be able to truly enjoy himself during the trip. On the other side of the room, Naeun was standing with Soyoung and Mikyung, looking a bit troubled. She sighed softly and said that she had nothing to wear or even to bring with her for the trip. Mikyung, standing next to her with an amused smile, said that they should have gone shopping together beforehand so she wouldn't have to worry now. Meanwhile, at the professor's office, a young girl was standing in front of the professor. She asked the professor if she was also going on the trip. The professor smiled kindly and nodded, saying that yes, she was going too, and that the girl should come along as well. The girl hesitated for a moment before replying that nobody in the department really knew her yet, and she wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to join. The professor chuckled and told her that this was actually the perfect time to go, since she would soon be working closely with everyone as a teaching assistant. It would be a good chance to get to know them before she officially started. Hearing that, the girl smiled shyly and said that in that case, she would join the trip too. The next morning, all the students gathered outside the university gates. The weather was clear, and their laughter filled the air as they chatted excitedly among themselves, waiting for the buses to arrive. Backpacks and travel bags were scattered around, and everyone seemed full of energy and anticipation. Junyeon stood with his own group, quietly observing the cheerful scene. He thought to himself that everyone really did look thrilled about the trip. It was impossible not to get swept up in the excitement. Suddenly, a boy approached him from behind, patting him on the shoulder and asking in a curious tone if he was really that close with the Ajumas. Another boy, standing nearby, joined in with a teasing grin and asked if he was dating one of them or something. Junyeon, startled, quickly shook his head and said that it wasn't like that at all. The two boys glanced at each other, and one of them shrugged and said he was true about that. They are not dating. Junyun overheard their exchange and felt a little awkward. He thought to himself that maybe, from an outsider's perspective, it really might look that way, since he often spent time with them. The first boy leaned toward the other and whispered quietly into his ear, saying that he had heard all those Ajumas were single, and that maybe they should try their luck with them during the trip. Hearing that, Junhyun sighed inwardly. He thought that of course they would misunderstand. After all, he had the cardio training sessions with them regularly. Still, he felt a bit sorry for those boys, realizing how naive their assumptions were. In his heart, he couldn't really blame them either, and he understood the reason they might be interested. He reflected that despite the age difference, each of those women had such charm and presence that it was natural for people to be drawn to them. They were beautiful, confident, and kind, qualities that attracted attention easily. But the thought that many other men might also be eyeing them made him uneasy. He realized that right now they treated him well because he was the only one close to them. But once they got bored or found someone else, they might not care about him anymore. Suddenly, Junyo noticed one of the boys approach Nayeon with a friendly smile, holding out a bottle of water toward her. The boy asked her to take it, saying it was for her. Before Nayeon could even respond, Junhyun quickly stepped forward, reached out, and grabbed the bottle from the boy's hand, saying casually that it was perfect timing since he happened to be really thirsty. The boy blinked in surprise, and Nayeon looked at Junhyun, slightly amused by his sudden action. A short distance away, Junhyun noticed another boy standing beside Mikyung, holding his phone and asking her if she would take a selfie with him. Mikyung smiled politely and was about to agree when Junhyun walked up to them and suggested that the three of them should take a selfie together instead. The boy, slightly startled but smiling, agreed. After the picture was taken, Junhyun looked at it and said that it turned out to be a pretty good photo, adding playfully that the boy was quite a good-looking man. The boy laughed awkwardly, thanked him, and walked away. From where she stood, Soyoung had been quietly observing the entire scene. She watched how Junhyun reacted each time one of the men approached them, and a soft smile appeared on her face. She found his behavior endearing and couldn't help thinking that he looked really cute when he acted that way, as if he didn't like the idea of them talking too much with other guys. Meanwhile, Nan was standing a little apart from them, asking one of the girls about the professor's whereabouts. The girl replied that the professor had said she would be joining everyone later at dinner. Just then, one of the boys raised his voice, calling out to the group and announcing that it was time to get on the bus since they were about to depart. Everyone began to gather their belongings, chatting excitedly as they boarded the bus. Junhyun was thinking that a series of pleasant, cheerful moments seemed to be passing one after another.